Thank you for choosing this session. I'm Alice, and I'm a linguist, kind of a Yiddishist, and today I'm a reader, primarily. And I hope that you are readers too, because there will be a lot of text up here today. We're going to talk about speculative fiction, fantasy, science fiction, genres that allow some part of unrealism in them. And we're going to talk about how authors write Jewish communities in these books and what makes these communities believable to us as readers, especially since we as Jewish readers can compare our experience with the experiences written in the text. I will talk about 3 books. The samples will be from the 3 books. Spin and Silver by Naomi Novik. It's a fantasy, the classic medieval fantasy. She sets the book in Litvas, which is a fictional country, kind of northeastern Europe, but there is no Europe in this world. We just guess that the customs she's describing and the language that she uses is very typical for something northeastern. The second book will be The Yiddish Policemen's Union by Michael Chabon, and it's an alternative history. The setting is District of Sitka in Alaska in 1990s. So this is not a fictional setting, but there will be some fiction. And Starglass by Phoebe North is a science fiction with a setting in space. The Jews here are traveling on a generation spaceship. They have departed Earth because it was going to be destroyed by an asteroid or something like that. And we are following the spaceship 500 years after they have started for a planet that they call Zehava. The spaceship is called the Share, which I find kind of ironic, but we can talk about it later. Has anyone read any of these books or heard about them? Like maybe, I don't know, Starglass. Okay, it's kind of obscure, but okay, the Yiddish Policemen's Union. Anyone's favorite? No? Good, okay. It's in my list favorites. That's why I'm asking whether you have read it, maybe.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
But you've heard about the problematic side of it. No, okay. Then you will hear today. that is something I can guarantee. And you don't need Yiddish, you don't need to speak Yiddish to understand what we're going to talk about. The authors certainly don't speak Yiddish, and even I don't speak Yiddish. I mean, I can read slowly and analyze, and that's it. And that's more or less enough for what we're going through today. But this also means that there are 2 other important books for me, which is, first of all, the Comprehensive Yiddish-English Dictionary, and Modern English Yiddish-English Dictionary, which, if you see the date when it was published, modern, you still find a lot of useful stuff in there. It's a treasure. But if you don't need to consult English first, then your best bet is the one up there. So, what's my plan? We're going to see a few samples from the books. And first we will try to find the Jewish in there, like which parts of the sample kind of hint at the fact that the people described are Jewish. The first sample is here. I was 12 when she died, and Rebbe Davison had told us about mitzvot only a few days before. How every good deed we did for the other citizens of the ship would benefit us too. Do you find anything Jewish in here? Do you?
No.
Yeah, okay, Rebbe Davison. Great, that stands out, right? Anything else? Mitzvot, correct. This is a passage from Starglass by Phoebe North. We will mainly be following the protagonist, the 16-year-old girl. Here I must say that Rebbe Davison is not what you think. It's not a religious position, it's a position of a teacher. This is a very secular community, but we'll see a little bit more later. The next sample is, I knew the moneylender was a servant of the devil, but I wasn't afraid of him. He was very narrow, hands and body and face. Mama had an icon nailed to the wall that was carved out of a skinny branch. He looked like that. Anything Jewish in here?
Well, a moneylender could be Jewish.
Okay. He certainly could. This is one of the professions allowed, so yes, he certainly could.
Icon nailed to the wall sort of makes me think about Jesus. Yeah. Yeah.
This is one of the elements, and the other is the servant of the devil. I mean, this is actually a perspective of a young girl from the majority of the country where the Jews live. So this is definitely how he views Jewish people. Well, this is believable. This is a believable view of Jewish people. A very poor family, no education, no contact with any Jewish people. And the moneylender is the father of the protagonist of this book. He comes to her house to collect the debt. So I find interesting here that she says, I knew he was the servant of the devil, but I wasn't afraid of him. So I knew. It's not something I see or I believe. I know it. Well, she's very young, but then she compares him to Jesus. Yeah, her mother. Do you think you know what religion this country has as its primary religion? Yeah, definitely. My guess is they're Orthodox Christian. The book never mentions Christians. The book has words Jew, but we know that there are two communities because of how it's written, not because there are any names of, I don't know, holidays or traditions or the name of Christianity or anything, nothing. Even the name of Jesus isn't there. Maybe there is no Jesus, but Jews still look like people who are depicted on the icons. Well, I find it a rather elegant example of an outsider perspective. The next sample is Landsman lives in 505 with a view of the neon sign on the hotel across Max Nordau Street. Any Jewish symbolism? Okay, yes. And 505, what's its reference for?
It's not a rabbi address.
It's 770.
Oh.
But
That's a good try.
for Jewish Tunisian 5 is a very important number.
Yeah, well, not as important as 10, but yeah, okay. Well, for me it was the Max Nordau Street, but that's because I know that this author is writing kind of a Yiddish land, so he is naming as many things as he can after something Jewish. Max Nordau was one of the leaders of the Zionist movement, like even in its early stages, and this is a passage from the Yiddish Policemen's Union. As for Landsman, I was careful not to cheat with Jewish names. Yeah, with Jewish names, because first of all, not every person who wears a Jewish name has anything to do with the Jewish culture, tradition, Jewish experience. Second of all, how many of us even wear Jewish names? I mean, I'm definitely not Rebecca or no. And so this is a very, very wacky indicator. This is why I kind of ignore Landsman. But yeah, this is a very carefully selected name because he's kind of Jewish, set in his place, but he has really no place. He's one of us, but what is one of us? Like, if you read the book, you can judge how well Shaban managed this metaphor, but we'll see. One more passage. Such a waste of geld to buy me clothes I surely outgrow again. Yes. Yes, there is no word money in this book. They only use geld, and at least I'm thankful for the consistency, because sometimes when you see that a term is in Yiddish and then it's suddenly in English, you're like, why? Do we have perspective shift? What is it here? But yeah, no, they use geld consistently, and I systematized the tools that the authors have for creating this kind of Jewish atmosphere into several categories. The first one are non-lexical details, like I knew he was the servant of the devil and the icon nailed to the wall, where something Jewish is described from a Jewish perspective or from an outsider perspective, but there are no specific words that you could pinpoint as Yiddish or Hebrew or anything like that. There are no specific names. The only reason we know this has anything to do with Jews is because we realize the culture of Northeastern Europe in the medieval times, and we kind of have context to help us here. The next category are Yiddishisms and by extension Hebraisms, somewhat less, but waste of geld or mitzvot is a typical example when the author uses borrowed words to create the atmosphere or the texture of the Jewish life. And the third category is proper nouns like Max Nordau Street or any other namings, except, as I said, names of people. And here it's worth noting that such cases as Rebbe Davison, they kind of belong to two categories because, Rebbe, Yiddishism, mitzvot, Hebraism, but it also describes the culture of this community. Okay, they have mitzvot, or they have something that they call mitzvot. They don't take any other title for this concept, and they have a position which has something to do with teaching or religion, whatever, we don't know yet. So sometimes things belong to multiple categories, and you can see that I have some space on the slide. So we'll have one more example from Naomi Novak right now. I thought at first they were just talking so fast that I couldn't understand, but then I realized they were saying words that I didn't understand at all, mixed up with words that I did know. Anything for me? Any language could be that. Yeah. This is also a perspective of a non-Jewish person on a group of people, which if this person would be of German origin, this would be a description. She would understand some words, and then she would have some words of Hebrew origin, some words of Slavic origin. So this would match, kind of. If this is, however, a Slavic country, East European country, this doesn't fit as well. But still, it's also a way to signal that we have to do with some other community, which speaks something different. The system is complete now, spoken language. It's any reference we get to the language the people are speaking. One can argue that a language also does not constitute Jewishness or non-Jewishness, but I think for mass market books, it's pretty interesting to notice such things. I think the most popular category would be Yiddishism or Hebraism, so we'll just look at some examples organized right now. From the Yiddish Policemen's Union, Meir Landsman is the most decorated shamus in the district of Sitka. He uses shamus here to mean policeman, police detective. Why ever he does this, I cannot answer. But what's a shamus? Who is a shamus? Yes. Right. This is a position of a synagogue, a helper in a synagogue. He repurposed an existing term, turned it into some kind of police jargon. Whether this is a good idea or not is something we can discuss. He's trying. Then he writes, some of these homicides are gang-related. Russian Starkers waking one another freestyle. Starker. Oh my God. What's a Starker? German-speaking people. Help me. Stark? And sounds familiar? Okay, well, he's basically seeing strong man in Yiddish. He means this to mean, he uses it to mean gangsters, so Russian gangsters in Alaska. I'm not sure he knew Russian. I think even one foreign language was hard for him, so I mean Yiddish, so I don't think he researched Russian at all or anything similar. But yeah, well, okay, he took a Yiddish word for strong man, Russians whacking one another. You see, he uses the language very expressively. He really paints pictures. And the next example here, now somebody has put a bullet in the brain of the occupant of 208, a Yid who was calling himself Emanuel Lasker. Definitely, he uses a Yid here to say a man, a Jew, a person, which would technically be correct. My problem is, though, that he uses Yid and Jew interchangeably and whenever he wants to use which words. So there is no system in his usage of Yid or Jew. I showed you the dictionaries, right? So what came to my attention is that depending on which dictionary you consult, for a police officer you get a word Scheuter, and for policeman you get a word Polizeiant or Polizeisker, depending on how old the dictionary is. So he could have taken any of these two. I mean, Scheuter doesn't even sound bad in English. He could have taken this, but he took shamus and repurposed it for his fiction. It's fiction. The next example will be from a different book. Starglass, the science fiction, the council told us that our compatibility made us soulmates. He was my Bashert, my destiny. Yeah, Bashert, yeah, kind of, yeah, soulmate, predestined person, predestined other. Bashert is a big deal in this book. I mean, 16-year-olds, right? But also they kind of have to decide who they're going to build their family with. So the next example, the past is a distraction the earth will left behind kaput. I don't find this passage dramatic at all because kaput breaks everything for me just on a phonetic level. I don't know. But he wants to say that the earth was destroyed, that the earth was broken, there was no earth anymore. So she wanted, I'm sorry. So we should not look back on the life we had, because we are on a generation spaceship right now, traveling for 500 more years towards another planet. These two lines are written in a letter by one of the ancestors of the protagonist, one of the original initial passengers of the ship. So she is very torn because of her leaving Earth. It's hard to believe that something will be destroyed before you see it. And she decided to leave, so she will never be the witness. And also her waiting for the better life, it's a life that she will never have. She has to reproduce, generations of her children have to reproduce, and that's how the humanity reaches the planet. She is not going to live 500 years to see this. I will show you one more example here. My father said that dressing ourselves in the stiff pale cloth would be a mitzvah. They are attending a burial of the protagonist's mother. And the next example, I was naive. I thought that maybe my Abba would draw me into his arms, comfort me like Mama would have done. Abba, the Hebrew component, very interesting because the final two lines are from the same person. At first it's my father, then Abba, and then Mama. So it's not, it's kind of a salad. What I find kind of interesting here is that the first two examples are in Yiddish and are with Yiddish components, and the later two with Hebrew.
Bashert is Hebrew.
Bashert is German. Bashert.
Yeah, it's from Yiddish.
So yeah, I don't know. Do you know the word Bashert in Hebrew? Did I make a mistake? To my knowledge, too. I mean, I read the dictionaries. Not necessarily, but if I'm wrong, I would rather be corrected right now so I can learn from my own mistakes, humbly. Yeah, we will come back to this problem of consistency a little bit later. We'll look right now at a book that has almost no borrowings from either of the Jewish languages, and everything the author does, almost everything the author does to signal that we have to deal with the Jewish community is describing from the outside or from the inside. At home, my mother was making thin cabbage soup and scrounging together used cooking oil to light the lamp for the third night of our own celebration. We only had the flames lit for a few minutes before a gust of wind came in and blew them out. And my father said, well, perhaps that means it's time for bed, instead of relighting them, because we were almost out of oil. For the 8th day, he was whittling candles out of wood, little narrow sticks to burn, because we'd used the last drops of oil the night before. There wasn't going to be any miracle of light in our house. Any idea what's Jewish in here? Like, how do I know it's a Jewish passage? What celebration is she talking about? Right, oil for a lamp, the third night of our own celebration. Like, we don't just have some Russian classics level of depression here. We also have definitely a Jewish story. And the 8th day, like, okay, 3rd day, 8th day, candles instead of oil, because if you don't have oil, if you can fulfill the mitzvah completely, you do what you can. No miracle of light. Also a clear reference. What's great about this passage is that if you don't know what celebration she's talking about, you completely miss the reference. It's just a fantasy world with a fantasy community, with fantasy holidays, whatever rituals there are. But if you know, you will never overlook it. It's there. You know immediately this is a Jewish community. The next example is from an outsider's perspective, the moneylender said, a magic spell over the bread when we sat down, but I ate it anyway. It's the same girl that thought he was the servant, that knew he was the servant of the devil, many pages later. What magic spell is he saying? What's this? What is this? Yeah, right, bracha, a blessing. A blessing, yeah. The next example is also outsider's perspective. Her son was a tall, silent young man with curls behind his ears, like Panov Mandelstam wore. Curls behind his ears, like, yeah, he's wearing this thing behind his ears, okay? But I kind of tricked you here because the sentence goes on as follows, like Panov Mandelstam wore, so they were Jews also. Okay, the mystery is not really there, but again, if you know what I think this is a boy. If you know what this character is talking about, you get the reference before you read the word Jews. And one more sample. Will you get one of these other servants to find out where the house of Panov Moshel stands? It's in the Jewish quarter. They have Jewish quarters. So the Jews in this world also settle kind of in their own communities. This one is talking about a big city, a big rich city, and they can have Jewish quarters. It's a referral to some mysterious Eastern European, Northern European country. It's called Lietuvos. It's not Poland, no. Not that they think it's Poland. But the choice, actually, of this honorifics, Panov, is also pretty nice. It ends to the color of the text. And now comes my favorite passage, which has to deal with the question, is it kosher to kill your husband? I'm not joking. Because if anyone is contemplating this question, the answer is kind of yes. So I have to give you some backstory. Our protagonist is a Jewish girl, and she is taken as a queen/prisoner into a kingdom of eternal ice because their king, a cruel creature, thinks that she can make gold out of silver, and they really want gold. She is thinking whether she can kill him because with the gold that he is getting, his power grows stronger and he makes the winters more severe. And she understands that if the winter continues, it's May, if the winter continues, the crops will die and the people will come for the Jews because they can do nothing to this creature of eternal ice and magical power and whatever. So they will come for those they can reach, logically. We've seen that in history. And these are her thoughts. It felt like murder. No, I wouldn't lie to myself. It was murder if it worked. But after all, the Starik, the name of this nation, seemed to think it perfectly reasonable to murder me. And I hadn't made him any promises either. I wasn't sure I was even really married. I love this. He'd given me a crown, but there certainly hadn't been a marriage contract, and we hadn't known each other. So isn't this brilliant? Like, okay, she has a crown from him, a precious gift that the groom gives to his bride during the wedding ceremony. So this element of tradition is there, but there was no ktubah, no marriage contract. So are they even halachically married? And they had known each other, which is also not so nice for a Jewish wedding. They had known each other before. Well, yeah. What I love here is that her problem is not so much whether it's kosher to kill him, as whether she is married to him or not. What's her legal status and what she thinks then. I'd ask a rabbi if I ever had the chance to talk to one again. Is there any more Jewish thing than to ask a rabbi when you have a legal question? I'm not sure. And yeah.
I hesitate to ask this question.
Go ahead.
The word other is quite. We haven't known each other before. When you had a comment on that, that word before is quite crucial, isn't it? Because otherwise it could be read as we hadn't known each other in a biblical sense, or we hadn't known each other before and just socially interacting.
This is where I cheated a little bit, but they were, let's say, they were not introduced to each other in any acceptable way for a Jewish girl to marry afterwards. So yeah, but they also had known each other in a biblical sense. So that also, yes and yes. And it ends as follows: but married or not, I was reasonably sure that the rabbis would tell me that I might justly take Judith for my model and take off the Sterk's head if he gave me the opportunity. He was the enemy of my people, not just me alone. Who is Judith? Do we know Judith? Why is she referring to Judith at all?
Holofernes.
Right, and spoiler, Judith won. If anyone's not familiar, Holofernes was the general who tried to invade Israel, and his method was basically to cut the Jews from the water source. So what Judith did, she went to him with wine and cheese and songs and etc., and then she cut off his head. This is why role models are important. Thank you. Okay, now we'll see some reference to the spoken language from the same book. And this will be kind of an assignment for you. These three passages happen on different pages, but they are from the same character, this Jewish protagonist. The Starik might have given me 3 days, but I had only the time until sundown on Friday to get the work done. I didn't think he would take Shabbat as an excuse. The second part. And it has to be done before Shabbos, I added. And then the third part. I kept Shabbat for the next day by telling myself the Torah out loud as much as I could remember. What's happening here? This is not a typo, and this is not an editor mistake. Something's happening, I promise you. Do you have an idea?
Why the switching between Shabbos and Shabbat?
This was my question, and I only noticed this during my third reading of this book. One of the hints is that the first and the latest passage are narration. It's first person, but it's part where she narrates the story. And the middle passage is when she's talking to a Jew. And I explain it to me as a way to kind of elegantly show that we have to deal with at least a bilingual community here. And that her thoughts to herself are in whatever language, it's not even a language thing, but her talking to a Jewish person is definitely in Yiddish. I took it as that, and I found, or I hope, you may argue with me, I found a kind of a confirmation on one of the later pages. This is described from an outsider's perspective. The character here is describing a group of women. When someone said something to me that I didn't know, I only smiled at her, and she smiled at me and said, "Oh, I forget," and told me over again what she was saying, except in the words I knew. So they were just talking some other language, but she, a non-Jew, shows her helplessness, and she repeats the same thing in a non-Jewish language, which I kind of connect with the slide before, with the examples before. We really have here a bilingual community, at least a bilingual, which also kind of seems realistic to me. We also find something like this in a book by Shaban, where our protagonist is calling his cousin partner, and the cousin curses him. He says, "A curse on your head, Maya," Berko says, and then in American, "God damn it." He switches to American English. Yeah, so this is how authors reference to whichever language is actually spoken by this community. Shaban plays a lot with including Yiddishisms and repurposing things into his text. For instance, here, he calls to wake his partner, Berko Shemetz. Detective Shemetz, Landsman says into his mobile phone, a department issue Shofar AT, a mobile phone. Yeah, he repurposes shofar for a trademark of a mobile phone, which is not a bad joke. I mean, both are kind of means of communication. So it even works here for his purposes. Then he introduces a song. We don't get the song, but we get the title of it, according to Nohamol, a song that Landsman and every other Alaskan Jew of his generation learned in grade school. The smell of the wind from the Gulf fills a Jewish nose with a sense of promise, opportunity, the chance to start again. Yeah, Nohamol, the title of the song, like once, yeah, like once more or one more time if you're a Britney fan. Also not such a bad choice. Naomi Novik plays with this naming thing also a little bit. Her protagonist has, as a queen, as a tsarina, she has servants and they refuse to tell her their names because they're evil magical creatures, and evil magical creatures don't give their names out just like that. So she wants to annoy them. Instead, when I finally sat down to breakfast, I said to the one with the beauty mark, I'll call you Fleck and Herzog after the braid, unless you'd prefer me to use something else. She hopes to insult them. She hopes that she will get their real names out of them. But it doesn't work. They feel flattered because she has just given them the name, the most precious thing in their world. They had their own, but now they have the second name from the queen. Wow. What she does here, Fleck, Yiddish for spot, and Zop, Yiddish for braid. She could have, again, if you search for birthmark in Yiddish, she could have chosen Leber or Mutterzeichen, but I think Fleck works better for an English text. And we don't have to be very critical here. But then she gives a third name to such a creature. Chauffeur, I said. The driver startled, just as Fleck and Zop had, glanced at me as if to make sure I'd been speaking to him. And this took me completely out of the scene, because isn't this word too modern for medieval Europe? I wasn't sure, so of course I looked it up. We get two versions for driver. Chauffeur, driver of a car, and balegole, driver of a horse or a wagon. Which would be the better choice? What do you think? Like, he's driving a sleigh. Is it a car or is it a horse? I'd say he's a balegole, not a chauffeur. I'm not, or I'm sure, but I cannot confirm it. I have no sources that chauffeur came to Yiddish much later, when, I don't know, words like chauffeur came to English and other European languages from the French. So I think if she really was a Jewish girl that she should have been, she would have called him a balegole. Yeah, anyways, that's just one mistake. If we look, or is it even a mistake? It was a try. It was worth trying. If we look at what Shaban does, he puts his jacket, feels for the wallet and shield in the breast pocket, pats his sholem. I mean, come on, what is his petting? What is this guy petting at all? Is it even acceptable in a situation where he's in? But no, okay, it's a chopped Smith Wesson, so it's a gun. No worries, he's not doing anything unmodest, it's a gun. I don't really know why he calls it a sholem though. This is why I Googled, but first I went for the dictionary. You could call it a pistol, you could call it a nagan. So if pistol was not exotic enough, nagan would have worked just as good. Why not? But no, he chose sholem, and he explains in an interview why he did, to New York Times, no less. A sholem is a gun, a bit of wordplay, as sholem in Yiddish means peace, EA, and peace, IE, is slang for gun in English. I mean, dude, the award for the worst wordplay ever goes here, because not only you make a joke and have to explain it, but you also translate slang from a completely different culture, assuming that the Yiddish culture, when they settled in Alaska in, well, 40s or 50s, had their own slang for a word gun, or no proper word for the word gun. Okay, if he wanted to do this, he could have taken shtick, which is peace in correct writing. Just think of it. He pulled out his shtick. Like, no, okay, that sounds terrible, but sholem sounds terrible too. Am I right? Or am I right? Anyways, he gets a lot of backlash for this specific thing, because Yiddishists are very passionate, devoted, and invested people, and they don't give up just like that. The next example. While he waits for the Beatlatke to show, Landsman knocks on doors. Beatlatke. Hello, how are you? Bitlatke. Have you any ideas? Okay, Bitlatke, well, with this bit we can kind of think he's hinting at a bit cop. And again, he has to explain in an interview what he's doing, this time to The Guardian. He says, a uniform cop is called a latke because their heads are latke shaped. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the shape of a latke. Yeah, normally you do, I promise I didn't even try to look for the most ridiculous example. I've made worse. But normally you do try to shape it after a circle. It doesn't always work because it's potato stripes and it's kind of difficult. But okay. I could not understand why this bothers me so much. Until I found an interview of Miranda Cooper to, it was an article for the Yiddish Book Center. She wrote, Yiddish does not need Shabens, Sholems and Latkes because it already has Pistol and Polizei. To create a Yiddish-speaking world in English with cutesy smatterings of repurposed Yiddish throughout is to deny the truth of Yiddish as a modern language, with a robust vocabulary that evolved with times, even a specific vocabulary for crime fiction. And here she is referring to detective novels, crime novels that were written in Yiddish by Yiddish authors. So if you wanted to research, he had material. He could have, okay, maybe he cannot read Yiddish. He could have consulted people who do read. He knows the crime fiction of the Yiddish language, who could have helped him with slang words to make it more authentic. But this is not even bad. Worse is the article by David Myers, who called it Shabens Imaginary Jews, and you can find it on JSTOR, which, if you don't know, JSTOR is a library for scientific and scholarly articles. He spends 18 pages criticizing, some of them are introductory, but 5 good pages are devoted to criticizing what Shaben does with Yiddish and generally with Yiddish culture, because here he says Shaben confounds a Talmid Chachem, a scholar of Jewish law who is often a child prodigy, with tzaddik, the mature leader of a Hasidic community, who is distinguished less by scholarship than piety. He alternates between the terms tzaddik hador and Messiah as if they were interchangeable. They are not. They are not is just the final nail in his coffin. I mean, this passive aggression is something to strive for, I feel. But this is why you don't mess with Yiddishes. You will end up on JSTOR and not in a complimentary way. And he's right. This just shows some kind of laziness. He aimed high and then, yeah. But at least in Shaben's book, it's clear what language they're speaking. He aims for Yiddishland and he writes it as well as he can. In the book by Phoebe North, where we have the ship that's called Asherah, he told me I would be placed on Asherah 506 passengers and me among them, and we would leave for Epsilon Eridani in 1 week's time. Epsilon Eridani is the star. Then, her leadership skills and self-sacrifice were going to lead us straight to the Hava's surface, something Hebrew, and then even she was indeed a true Asherati, so this Asherati kind of a Hebrew derivative pattern from Asherah, Asherati as a citizens, the true citizens with the true spirit, which the 2 final examples kind of hint at Hebrew. The first one, Hebrew or Canaanite, I'm not sure here. It's kind of difficult to say with this goddess. But then she does the following. Direct speech, Mazel Tov, she said. Mazel Tov, not Mazal Tov. And even I found myself guilty of this, sitting as I combed the snarls from her hair. Sheina, Sheina Meidelech. Again, Yiddish, not Hebrew. Then we have, again, direct speech. Now let us sing the Kaddish. Would have been spelled differently, I guess, if it was Yiddish. I think it would be a Kaddish or something, like not necessarily with an I, but I'm not sure. I won't pretend that I know more than I do. And the final example, every job is useful if we're to achieve Tikkun Olam, which is definitely Hebrew. Like if she wanted to do Yiddish, it would be Tikkun Olam, or I guess. I think why this is happening is the reason can be found in the interview that this author gives. And she says the very first version of Starglass didn't have any of the Jewish cultural elements. At the time, I had named Tara, the protagonist, Tara Feinberg, just because Feinberg was my mother's last name. Then I thought, maybe she actually needs to be Jewish. Judaism in diaspora has a lot in common with generation shifts, as the people are wandering from their homeland. I had to answer questions such as, why would there be a ship of Jews in space? I really had to interrogate the book to create the universe that feels real and cohesive. About real and cohesive, you can judge for yourselves if you read the book, this kind of inconsistency with Yiddish Hebrew. For me, she writes somewhere in the book that they tried to revive Yiddish and Hebrew as their cultural languages, as their connection to the earth, but it looks like they couldn't make up their mind, because it looks like they just all speak English, but they use Hebrew borrowed words for the things that they know as Hebrew, tikkun olam, and Yiddish borrowed words for things like mazel tov or parts of a song or something. I'm not sure which language they're speaking. So, why did you have to spend so much time listening to all of this? First of all, I hope it was fun, at least maybe a little bit. Second of all, I'm not criticizing the authors for what they're doing, globally speaking, because I think it's important to have fiction, especially mass market fiction, especially popular fiction, that sees Jewish communities as a target audience and that acknowledge us as a target audience. But I also think that trying to write a community using a language that you don't know is always a leap of faith. You can never be sure that you have done enough research. I'm pretty sure everyone has tried their best. Maybe they aim too high, but it also doesn't mean that one cannot discuss it. And I hope that the discussion specifically around such books and mistakes or maybe brilliant ideas that you find here is something that can make the quality of this fiction better. Is something that can show the authors that, yes, there are people who are interested in this and they want quality content. And they can tell quality content from lazily done work. I certainly hope so. I hope we still have some time for maybe if someone wants to discuss the thing. Before we get there, if we don't have enough time right now, you can find me. You can find my Russian language media. So if you speak Russian, there's some content for you to enjoy there. If you don't, you can still message me. I understand English. And yeah, so if you want to talk about anything, we can. Like if you want to discuss what Shaban does with Yiddish or how brilliantly, I don't know, Novik writes an ethnicity without any words at all. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for your attention. Any questions, ideas, comments? Yes.
Thank you for saving me from reading the Shabon.
It's not that bad, is all I can say. If it was that bad, I wouldn't have finished it. Well, no, that's not true. I read it for another talk, and so I had to finish it, yeah. Well, if my problem with this Shaban's book is that he tries to revive the Yiddish life. Or, I mean, his idea of this Jewish Alaska is that at some point the American politicians thought it would be a good idea to give Jews some space so they can escape from Europe during the 40s, the 30s. Just some space for 60 years so they can survive, and then they do whatever they want. This was a real project, but there were very many opponents of this project, and in his novel, the major opponent dies in a car crash. So this is why this happens, which is not unrealistic as is. And he says in all of his interviews that he does this because he finds it's really sad that there is no country where Yiddish is spoken as a main language, where it's not an official language or something. And then he does something like this, some sloppy, lazy work, which is my personal problem. Because if you're aiming to write a Yiddish land maybe you should do it correctly. If you care for the Jewish people who speak Yiddish, maybe you should not forget that there are still people who speak Yiddish and who can. So he's really writing for an outside target audience. He's not writing for anyone who cares about Yiddish at all. Just the average American or from any part of the world reader who sees, okay, there is a lot of texture here. Which again, he also got a lot of critique for that because people just did not understand what he wanted. There are just so many borrowed Yiddishism included. Which is why I guess edition with this cover has a glossary. Shames, Sholem, whatever. I'm still a fan of shtick instead of Sholem, but okay. He tried, but it wasn't enough. Someone even criticized him for using Noz for detective, to mean detective, which actually is logical because Noz just means nose in Yiddish, and a detective is someone who sniffs around, who looks for stuff. So this is the, what's it called? This is the jargon I understand and accept, not the Sholem part. Like even the Latke is okay, it's funny. Many people who criticized him for using Yiddish are also people who never looked in a Yiddish dictionary what he was aiming for, what he was intending. So there are kind of three parts of critique. People who don't know Yiddish at all and are angry because there are too many Yiddish words that they don't understand, they get a glossary. People who know a little bit of Yiddish, or people who don't know Yiddish but are interested but they don't want to look up a word or Google. And people who know Yiddish or care about it and who find some inconsistency, want to explain it, and then get completely devastated by the treatment of the language. Because for him, it's like Yiddish doesn't exist. I have to make up things, and I don't make up them in an elegant way. I hope we can get over this phase of our literary culture. I hope we can get more quality work. Does anyone want anything to add? We still have 5 minutes and no one is taking us out yet. Yeah.
How many copies of these books are published, if you know?
No, I don't
Because
know.
it's such a narrow,
I don't know, but Shaban...
alternative history and fantasy and everything together.
Yeah.
And
I cannot answer this question, but Shaban got some kind of prize, literary prize for another novel of his, so this book probably sold well. Starglass is kind of obscure. It was self-published initially, and also the genre, the young adult fiction set in space. It's not something you will hear about if you are not specifically a young adult reader or a reader of young adult fiction. It has its own, its own formula. Spin and Silver, I think, deserves more attention than it gets. Maybe it will, but as for copies, nope. I have no information on that. Well, the most popular is definitely the Yiddish Policeman's Union, the most well-known. I expected that someone would know the Yiddish Policeman's Union. And then someone would say, oh, I like it, and I will be like, oh, it's my least favorite. Yeah. Nice to meet you. Yeah. Any other comments? Okay, Daniel was first.
I'm not sure if we're an Israeli fantasy or science fiction scene, but are Israeli authors really seeing Yiddishism in their work? Are you aware of it? Because these three are Americans, right?
Yes, these are all Americans. I didn't mention it. All these authors are Americans of Jewish heritage. I decided to narrow the talk so that we cannot say, oh, okay, they are Jews, they don't understand. So that we only talk about the Jews who don't understand, or who do. As for Israeli fiction, I know there are Israeli speculative fiction writers, but I'm not sure they're adding any Yiddish in there. It was a tricky question. But yeah, Israelis are writing about Jews in fantastic settings too. Who would have thought? And you wanted to say something too?
Well, yeah, but such an obscure point.
There was a lot of obscure right here today. So why not?
Boris Sandler is the editor of Yiddish Branch, and he used to write for Sovetish Heimat. And I think in the 1970s, they had a trip to Star City or something, which is outside Moscow, I believe. And then they devoted an edition of Sovetish Heimat to futuristic stuff, and he wrote about flights through space. It's a Yiddish short story which is reproduced in one of his books.
Okay.
which has got a lot of Yiddish. Obviously, a lot of it invented because he had to invent terminology which didn't exist. But this was an official Soviet publication, Soviet Shame.
Oh, that's nice to know.
Sorry?
It was published in
Yeah. Soviet Shame, yeah, it was a Yiddish periodical, an official one. They were all paid journalists. Yeah, it's about a spaceship and all sorts of goings on in the cosmos, and it's great fun.
This is something that Phoebe North could have read to make her.
Well, she should have done, but I'm not sure she would have.
She could have.
I only know this because he read it.
Yeah.
He read it. I was part of the group where he read it. So it's fun to see. And the history being, the Star City and the Soviet Union and all that was very interesting.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think it's called Star City, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Then again, thank you for choosing this session. And have a nice evening. Thanks.